If you've just begun and you're on the journey learning to handstand, it's important to keep in mind that you are going to start weak, and that is fine and it is completely normal. Unless you come from the background of gymnastics or circus artistry and you're used to being upside down for prolonged periods of time, this is a foreign thing for us, and strength is very specific. So your wrists and shoulders are not used to holding you inverted for long periods of time. So while you work on that, it's also important to spend some time thinking about what you're doing. Because hand balancing, first and foremost, is a skill. It will feel like a strength deficit for the first couple of months, because it is, but everything after that, it's more about skill acquisition. And the more you think about a skill, the more you conceptualize about it, the quicker you will develop the skill. So here are some things that you can do in your very early stages of learning to handstand in your chest walls. So you're going to learn to use the wall less, rather than staying connected to this training wheel for too long. We want index fingers facing forwards parallel to one another, fingers fanned out around that, or middle fingers facing forwards parallel to one another. Whichever feels most natural out of these two on your wrists and shoulders. And the reason that we want this is because if we're standing square with our big toes facing forwards and we start to lean in towards this, you'll notice that your big toes have to flex heavy in towards the floor to prevent you from falling down forwards. Now there, I specifically mentioned the word big toes, because you can actually turn off all other 8 toes and maintain that lean. But if you use all other 8 toes besides the big toes and try lean, it's nowhere near as effective. And it's different from person to person, foot to foot, but it's roughly around 80% of this mechanic that the big toe is responsible for. Now in a two-handed handstand, you can only fall one of 2 directions, forwards and backwards, because we have 2 pillars of support. So if we can only fall one of 2 directions and the big toe makes up for around 80% of one of these directions, it's important that we replace that mechanic with something. And that's why these 2 fingers are going to face forwards parallel to one another, fingers fanned out around that. Because your index and your middle finger are actually your longest and your strongest fingers. Your ring finger is actually your weakest finger if you look at the anatomy of the forearm, and your pinky finger is quite a strong finger, but he's a crimper, and that doesn't help us in this equation. Also, maybe more important than just raw strength and length of the fingers is the index and the middle fingers have the most dexterity and articulation, and if we're looking to make fine motor adjustments with the hands, these are going to all round be the best 2 for this equation. Now when people first start trying to handstand, one of the things that they like to do is this with the hands and turn them out, because it takes immense pressure out of the wrists. And the wrists are going to be one of your first failing points due to the fact that they're not used to holding your entire body weight for prolonged periods of time. But this is very counterproductive to learning to handstand. See, if I have my feet faced out from one another and I try lean, my lean is very minimal. And this is due to 2 reasons. Number 1, our main pusher, our big toe, is now pushing energy inwards, and we cannot fall into ourselves. So we're losing exponential energy to a direction that we can't fall in. And number 2, balance can be boiled down to a very simple physics equation. Center of mass above base of support. Now, when I turn my hands and feet out, I'm shortening the base of support. So now my center of mass has less room to move. So although this might feel nicer, this is going to give me a greater dependence on the wall, because I'll be doing less with the hands and leaning more in towards the wall as a compensation. Now if we come back to our feet facing forwards and we lean again, we'll notice that it is our big toes pushing them towards the floor to hold us there. But where is that energy coming from? You'll feel it running up through the foot and into your posterior leg, your calf muscles. Yeah? You can change basically everything else with the body besides where the center of mass sits, and you can hold that engagement. But what you can't do is actively turn the calf muscles off and continue to stay there. So it's the shortening of the posterior leg that actually gives the big toe the pressure to be able to hold your entire body weight. Because realistically, if I was just doing that with my weight, I wouldn't be able to hold too much. But it's not that, it's this entire complex. So if we can't create leverage within the foot and the big toe without the use of the calf muscle, we're going to need to replace the calf muscle with something here. Thus enter this fellow here. The issue is this fellow here doesn't have a clue how to be a calf muscle because he's never needed to be a calf muscle before. And again, specificity is king. So the way that we activate our forearm to act as a calf muscle is to pronate in towards the floor. Now a pronation is a rotation of the wrist and forearm, not a rotation of the humerus. So all I'm doing is rotating to push my first knuckle in towards the floor, which can feel very peculiar, especially when upside down, because your IQ is operating at about 30% of what it normally is, and this here is a motion you've never needed to worry about before. Instinctively, due to natural human laziness, you're going to try hold all of your weight in towards the heel of the hand and in towards the PC form, rather than rolling that weight in. But if we have a look at my forearm, yeah, even if I'm pushing my big toe in towards the floor, If all my weight's here, I have no engagement in my calf muscle. But when I pronate in towards the floor, you see the activation within the forearm that will then assist the fingers in flexing against gravity. To summarize what we're doing with the hands, it's index and middle fingers facing forwards parallel towards one another, while we push the first knuckle in towards the ground. With the fingers, we want them actively curled in towards the floor in what they would call cambered grip. So you can see I'm pushing the base of the first knuckle in towards the floor and then bending at the first digit, so then that way I can keep a continuous downward pressure of actively pressing the fingertips in towards the floor. Some people feel more at home here, but this is a much harder way to learn how to apply pressure in towards the ground. And if you're still at the learning stages, I recommend that you go in towards that cambered grip position. We want to be elevating in towards the scap as much as possible. Not only is this going to help us use the upper trapezius and levator scap to stabilize the shoulders, but it's going to give us more freedom to move the shoulder. You see, when I flex my shoulder, that's honestly all I can do. It gets caught here along the way. Until I elevate the scap, when I slide the shoulder blade towards the ear, it creates more room for me to be able to flex the shoulder further. And the more I can get my arms towards being vertical with the body, the easier it's going to be for me to hold myself in towards a handstand, because I won't be battling different angles. Where you look is just somewhere that feels natural for you for now, as long as it's on the floor. You'll have a tendency to look towards the wall because you're trying to instinctively dump weight in towards the wall because it's easier there. But we want to have the head looking just somewhere that feels natural between the base of the thumb and the tip of the index finger. And the more open you are through the shoulders, the more natural it's going to feel to look a bit further down, and vice versa. The more closed the shoulder is, the more it's going to feel natural to look a little bit further up. There should be a degree of tension within the body. It doesn't need to be rock solid in a specific posture, but should just be tight enough that if someone was to come try move you, you'd be resisting it. Legs, knees are actively extended. There's a contraction within the glutes, and we actually want to be curled in towards the toes. One of the most common cues in hand balancing is this obsession about pointing the toes. But in a chest to wall, this is actually detrimental, because as we point the toes, we are bringing more weight back in towards the wall again, rather than having a verticality within the legs to hold all the weight centers directly on top of one another. You see, if I have all the weight centers on top of one another, including the heels of the feet, I'm actually simulating a handstand better because I'm holding the center of mass above the base's support. While if I point the toes, I'm now leaning more weight in towards the wall. I could alternatively pike more in towards the hips, but then this is practicing a different pelvic and leg positioning rather than a vertical leg position. So to repeat myself once again, every cue that I'm giving here is going to make it harder, but that's because every cue that I'm giving you is meaning that you are doing more and the wall is doing less. And the more that you do and the less the wall does, the quicker we're going to progress in towards the realm of hand balancing. When going towards the wall, we want to go uncomfortably close because again, we are trying to simulate the handstand. And one of the things that makes a handstand is where the center of mass is in relation to the base of support. So although you might have to start at an angle to build some confidence and awareness, we want to progressively move closer and closer and closer towards the wall with the hands. Because when the wall is holding the majority of the weight, it doesn't matter what you're doing with your hands and your shoulders because you're leaning in towards the wall. But when you actually get in towards the position when the center of mass comes directly above the base of support, then you'll feel the hands and shoulders, everything having to operate in a very specific way to stop you from falling backwards onto your spine. With just the big toe on the wall, we're looking to make this as light as humanly possible. Imagine the shoji, the Japanese paper sliding doors. Your big toes are not on them. If you push your big toe too heavy in towards it, you'll fall through the door. Because that's a sensation that you're going to have to get used to in hand balancing, how to hold your own weight there rather than feeding off the wall. If you can use the wall to simulate a handstand, it's one of your best tools for developing the handstand. It's already a long journey to learn to handstand, and if you're upside down and just leaning on towards the wall, because it makes it easier for you, it's going to take you infinitely longer to acquire this skill.